name is Aldo Gandia. I am the president and founder of the Barroom Network. 9 years ago when I started this venture, one of my goals was to give a voice to people who have not had a voice in the world of writing and producing and podcasting. Give them a voice so that they could express their opinions and their thoughts about their favorite teams, especially the Chicago Bears, one of my biggest passions. And so here we are 9 years later, and we are again back at it. Tonight, I present to you a new podcast hosted by Jeff and Tim Willis. They're twin brothers, but they don't have identical viewpoints on things related to the Chicago Bears. This should be fun. Let's get started.
Four-man rush again. Fields to the end zone. Moore. Touchdown.
With time, throws it short. Foreman with the catch. Foreman to the end zone for the touchdown. Warriors' long pass of the day is 15 yards, and it's intercepted. Picked off by Jalen Johnson. Johnson untouched for the touchdown.
Welcome in, Bears fans, to the debut episode of the Willis Twin Towers podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Jeff Willis. This is my co-host, Tim. You want to introduce yourself real quick, Tim?
Yeah, I'm Tim Willis. Like you said, we're identical twin brothers, and hey, we're just ready to talk Bears with all you guys tonight.
So I just want to start off this episode by saying real quick, we're very appreciative of all you guys being here. And we are going to start off by saying there is not a quarterback controversy in Chicago. Can we just start off by saying that right off the bat right now? There is no quarterback controversy as of this moment. So we'll start by saying that, and we'll kind of get into stuff here a little bit. I'll talk about myself some, and then Tim will kind of talk about himself a little bit so you guys can get to know us a bit. We're both originally born and raised in the South Bend, Indiana area. About 15 minutes from Notre Dame is where we grew up. Huge Notre Dame football fans all our lives. Huge Bears fans. Actually, growing up initially, when we were really young, the Bears weren't very good. So as you can imagine, we took on some other teams we liked also, but we've always been avid Bears fans all our lives. We are big baseball fans. I'm a big White Sox fan. Tim is a Reds fan. I'll let him kind of divulge on that a little bit if he wants to. And also we're just big sports fans in general. We've always kind of grown up playing ball all our lives as kids. We were playing backyard baseball, backyard football with our friends and our neighbors when we were kids growing up, and we wrestled in high school. So we're always fans and big athletes growing up. And, stuff like this has always been important to us and something we were passionate about. So it really means a lot to us to have this opportunity here. And it means a lot to us that you guys are here listening to us. So thanks, Joe. I see your message there. Congrats on the show. It means a lot that you're here listening to us. And I'll let Tim kind of say a little bit about himself before we get into the Bears some.
So, yeah, just to add into what Jeff was saying, yeah, we grew up in South Bend. We bleed blue and gold in our family. Like you said, we weren't always Bears fans early on because, the Bears weren't very good. And we weren't far removed from Joe Montana playing at Notre Dame. We were born in '89. Joe was in his early 70s. So we had a lot of coercion, you could say, with Joe Montana. And so I grew up a big 49ers fan early on when I was probably, up till about 6, 7 years old, 8 years old, until the Bears finally got a hold of me. But just to touch up on what Jeff was saying, yeah, I'm not a Chicago fan for baseball. Never have been. I'm actually a Reds fan, which honestly, the only reason that I am a Reds fan is because when I was younger, my favorite color has always been red. And so I watched them playing the Cubs one day on TV, and I was like, hey, I really like this team. And it stuck. I've been a Reds fan ever since. And then Ken Griffey Jr. came on to the Reds, and I was hooked because that was my favorite player growing up. But So yeah, that's a little bit about that. And Jeff and I actually live completely across the country from each other. Jeff lives out in Arroyo Grande, California, and I live over here in Terre Haute, Indiana, about 3 hours southeast of Chicago. So yeah, and it's kind of cool that we can actually see each other, even though we don't see each other, even if it's just on this show and this podcast. But we talk daily, and it's always Chicago Bears chit chat back and forth. And I tell you, this to me is just going to be just like he and I on the phone every day, the way we go back and forth. And I owe a lot to my knowledge of the Bears because of our back and forth conversations. And we don't always see eye to eye, and that's what makes it really special and really cool, is that we can be brothers and still have a difference of opinion, especially from the Bears. So it's awesome. Yeah, Joe, that's awesome. You're from St. Joe. We've spent some time in St. Joe, Michigan.
I like St. Joe, Michigan. It's a great area up there. Some good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually lived in Niles for a little bit, Joe, interestingly enough. It wasn't for very long, but about a year or so. So yeah, I was just going to say, Tim brought up a good point, and I appreciate him saying that he dedicates some of his knowledge base to me. And, I honestly have to say the same thing. When Aldo and I first talked about this opportunity to have this show, I mentioned to him that I dedicate a lot of my knowledge base to a lot of the conversations and talks that Tim and I have had about the Bears, over the years, just because, we both are so passionate about our team. And it means a lot to us to see them finally starting to turn a corner. And I really, honestly, I think we can all say after the first few weeks, we were getting a little concerned that was going to be the case. But really, I think they are starting to finally turn a corner now a little bit. And especially defensively, that defense is really starting to come together. And I think the offense is getting there. It's still a little inconsistent, but we're getting some things together there. There's some points that I want to dig into later on, like Tevin Jenkins is a big one. You guys are going to find on this show, we are big Tevin Jenkins fans, and you're going to find this is probably the Tevin Jenkins fan club here watching this show. So we're big fans of his, and we really believe he transforms the line. And I think a lot of the fans that watch the Bears probably find the same thing. But I do want to say, as far as the direction I feel like the team is going, we are starting to trend in a good direction, I think. There was some question about the coaching staff, I feel like, early on, but I do think that they're starting to turn a corner, like I said, and I feel like we're starting to get on the right track here. There are some inconsistencies, especially offensively, but as I mentioned recently, I do like the direction that the defense is going, especially.
Well, before I actually comment on that, I wanted to have a shout out here. I see Alexis is on watching. Alexis is actually coming on as a guest here in a few weeks. So you guys are going to get to hear a little bit from her. Awesome football voice, awesome mind. It's awesome to have someone like that that we can bring in and banter back and forth with football. Alexis has some really great viewpoints. I share a lot of the same viewpoints as her. So shout out to Alexis. Also, if you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the Barroom Network. Like this video, subscribe to the Barroom Network. That helps us get the word out, and it also helps it gives you more related content to what you're watching here. So please do that. And yeah, to get along with what Jeff was saying, I do like where the defense is going right now. It's been pretty evident since Eberflus took over calling plays that he's going to be much more aggressive with the blitz. He's bringing 5 and 6 guys much more often than we saw with Alan Williams. And I think we have to with where we're at right now. This front four has still struggled to get pressure. Yannick Ngakoue was a big free agent signing, and we haven't seen a whole lot out of him yet. I think he's got 1 sack right now, maybe 1.5. So, that's a big $10 million contract for 1 season that hasn't really panned out yet. DeMarcus Walker also on the low end of that. Justin Jones finally got his first sack last week. So things are starting to come together a little bit, but I think bringing more pressure and bringing a blitz is also going to help that defensive line a little bit start getting their feet wet. But yeah, I like what we're seeing. The one thing I wish we'd see more of is Eddie Jackson on the field. I'd love to see him get back out there, and because when he's healthy and he's playing, he's so dynamic out there. I love seeing Jalen Johnson getting the turnovers. If he wants to help out his payday, that's how you do it right there, because that was the one thing that was missing from him getting that top corner money. And yeah, Tyreek Stevenson looked really good last week. He mirrored Devontae a few times, and it looked really, really good. So, once he gets rid of some of those penalties, I really like where he's going. And honestly, I really like where Ryan Poles has gone in these last few draft picks. I was kind of hesitant on Jervon Dexter at first and on Stevenson because I just didn't know a whole lot about them, and I didn't see a whole lot of tape on them. But I'm really impressed so far from what we're seeing. And I think Braxton Jones, or excuse me, not Braxton Jones, Darnell Wright is going to be like a perennial Pro Bowler. Like, this kid is something nasty. He's so good already as a rookie. And I can't wait to see his career unfold and how he can anchor that right side of the line down.
Well, let me jump on that real quick before I get back to the defense, and because I do want to make a couple points about that also. As far as Darnell Wright, I don't know if you remember me telling you this on draft night, on the Thursday night of draft night before the first round. I think we both kind of had a feeling that Wright might be the direction they would go. Neither one of us were entirely sure, but I think we both kind of had a good idea that might be the route they would go. And I remember telling you, I'm pretty sure I told you that night, that I had a feeling that the Bears would just this gut feeling that the Bears were going to end up drafting the player who would be the best player in the entire draft that night. Now, that may or may not come to fruition or not, but I can tell you one thing. He is awfully, awfully impressive. And the fact that he was basically playing with one arm on Sunday, that was just, I mean, it's insane. I mean, especially against who he was going up against, it was very, very impressive. And he was like I said, he was doing it with one arm, and he is going to play this week. So that's what they have now said, as far as the injury report. So he is going to play again this week. And I am looking forward to seeing him on Sunday night against the Chargers. But go ahead.
I was going to say, do you remember draft night? I remember telling you a couple of weeks before, I was like, man, Jeff, I really like this Darnell Wright kid. And you were pretty hard pressed on, who's that tackle I'm thinking of? The 6'8", lanky kid. Who am I talking? You know who I'm talking about? You were really pulling hard for him. Huh?
I liked Van Ness a lot before the draft.
Well, I'm talking offensive lineman. There was a tackle that you were really high on, and I just kept telling you about Darnell Wright. I was like, man, there's just something about this kid. I really like him, and he shut down Will Anderson, just completely took him out of the game. And you were like, I just don't know if they're going to go there.
It was Broderick Jones.
Yes, Broderick Jones. Yes. And I remember having that conversation. You're like, well, if they take a tackle, it's got to be Broderick Jones. And I remember having a conversation with you, and over the next few days, you really started to like fall in line with what I was saying with Darnell Wright. I was just like, this kid is he's going to be the top tackle in the draft. And I remember sitting there watching the draft, and it was getting late, and my kids were already in bed. And I remember my 3-year-old was asleep, and I was on the phone with Jeff, and we're watching the draft, and I hear Darnell Wright's name, and I start screaming. I'm like, yes, I called it. I'm so excited. I'm so happy. And I woke my kids up. So my wife was mad at me that night, but it was pretty awesome to see that the guy that I wanted was the guy that they took. And, before I hand it back over to you, Jeff, I want to mention everybody, even now, we still hear people talking about Jalen Carter. And before we really talk too much about that, I just want to say Darnell Wright and Jalen Carter, to me, are at this point in the season, they're pretty equal as far as the production that they've gotten and the upside that we're seeing. And I just want to point out the fact that Darnell Wright has impeccable character. The guy was doing wide receiver drills in training camp. Of course, it was by mistake, but this guy is looking for the extra work. And when he had his workout with Poles, they just had rave reviews about him. And the same couldn't be said about Jalen Carter. He showed up to his pro day overweight after he had to leave the combine. There were so many things that were huge red flags about that character. And the Chicago Bears locker room, as of now, or even in OTAs and training camp, was not ready for a guy like that to come in. We didn't have the leadership and the ability and talent wise across the board to bring in a guy like Carter into that locker room. Now, Philly's got Fletcher Cox on the defensive line, who is a perennial All-Pro, and he's going to go down as one of the greatest probably ever to play that position. But they have so many leaders on that team, and that team is already set up for success. They've already been to a Super Bowl. Like, that was the perfect fit for him. And I'm not sure that he could have gone many other places outside of them and maybe Kansas City, Detroit, possibly, that he could have had that same impact early and not been a locker room problem.
Well, I do just want to expound on that point real quick, but I do still want to get back to the defense. I do want to talk about that some. I still want to get back to that, but to expound on your point, I do agree with the Carter point. I don't know that you can say that their production has been relatively equal. Carter's been awfully impressive on that defensive line. But that being said, I mean, Wright's been impressive too. I'm not sure if he's on that level, but to expound on your point, they just got rid of Claypool. They traded a second-round pick, which ended up being 32 overall, and they got a pick swap for a six for a 7 for him. That doesn't look great, and it's really just because we wanted to get rid of him. So, and that was more or less. I mean, a lot of it was production, but a lot of it's also, I feel like, a character thing. He obviously wasn't fitting in what they were trying to do there. And now, if you bring in a guy like Carter, who may or may not fit that mold, and you may or may not get his potential, really, does that do you any good? Whereas if you get Wright, who you will probably get his full potential because of his character, it's more likely, I should say, that you'll get his full potential because of his character. That's a better route to go, especially because of his talent and all those things combined, and the fact he held up against great competition in the SEC, like Will Anderson, who he stonewalled, who Anderson, by the way, said was the best tackle he faced all season last year. So, those things all add up. But, and that's kind of to just kind of go off of what you were saying there about Wright. And I do really love the kid. I think he is a cornerstone piece for a long time. I do want to mention something about one of the comments that was up on the screen a few minutes ago. I believe it was Luke said, I mentioned a bunch of the guys who were all studs. And I agree with every single one of those guys that you mentioned. They're all ascending players. Gordon, after his broken hand, we haven't seen much from him yet. But I think once he starts to get kind of acclimated again from his injury, we'll see him start to be doing what he was at the start of the season again. But, again, as far as like the other guys there, they're all starting to show a lot. They're all showing a lot. So as far as future pieces for this defense, they're all looking pretty good. One guy I want to talk about a little bit is Dexter. I feel like he was maybe a little slow to get started, but the last couple of weeks, I don't know if anybody's been paying attention. Last week, he was really, really good, and he's been so good lately that he's been the best rookie interior pass rusher in the league as far as the metrics are concerned. I think he's got 9 pressures, which is tied for first. He starts converting some of those into sacks. I mean, you're talking about that potentially dominant 3 technique that this defense needs to really get going. It's that engine. If we can get Dexter going, because let's be honest, we have not seen enough from Justin Jones. You see the occasional blown up run play. That's about it. We don't see much from him in the pass rush game. I like the guy. I think he's a good guy for the defense as far as like a character piece and a good leader and all that. But like, as far as production on the field, we just don't see enough. And we need to see more of those reps going towards Dexter at the 3 technique, so we can see him improve some more and, potentially become that dominant piece for the future. I really like what we're seeing out of him. You got any thoughts on him you want to mention before I get going on a couple other guys?
No, I think you said it. I really, and like I told you, shortly after the draft, I wasn't real sure about him. And then they went back and forth with him and Pickens at the 1 technique and the 3 technique while they were trying to figure out where they were best fits. But I went to the Bears-Colts preseason game in Indianapolis, and I was standing at the edge with my son. He was trying to get some autographs. Jalen Johnson did sign his gloves for him. And we were standing there, and I was looking out, and I looked at Gervon Dexter, and I thought, this is a massive human being. This is a big man with those traits, that the speed he's got. This guy could be dominant if he can really figure out how to play in this scheme. And what we've seen is, yes, he is developing into that guy. And it just goes to show, like, Ryan Poles does see this stuff when he's evaluating talent. It's, he was playing in a read and react mirror defense in Florida. And, it's a totally different scheme here, but he found those traits that can translate, and how smart of a player he is. And it's working out right now. You're really starting to see that development come through. And yes, for this defense to have the success that we keep talking about, they've got to have that dominant 3 technique. They've got to have the Tommy Harris. They've got to have an Aaron Donald. They've got to have a guy at 3 technique that is just dominant. And Dexter is really starting to look that part.
Well, I mean, he's starting to look the part of a guy who can be that. Yes, I mean he's showing a lot in the push. I mean he's taking on double teams sometimes, and he does look like a different player than he did at Florida in the way he moves. In my opinion, the way he's getting off the ball, he's really getting after it now. To me, the way I'm seeing him go, and again, it's like you mentioned, he's so big, and it's like the kid is only 22. He's still young. He's still growing. He's only going to get better. He's only going to get bigger and stronger, and he's only going to get more and more used to the game he's playing, especially at the NFL level. And, defensive linemen are notoriously slow to come along. So, I would imagine that he is going to start to really come along pretty quick here towards the end of this season. And I really want to see how he develops going into next year, because if he can start to really show more, you may or may not need to address that position more in the earlier rounds of the draft next year. Which, as of right now, it's looking like defensive line is still going to be a big need, especially on the edge. And you have some other positions where it's also possible too, especially depending on what happens with Jalen here. I really think they should extend him. They need to extend him. I'll get on that point in a little bit too, as far as like what I believe the parameters can be for that, or some of the statements he's made about it also. But getting back to like the defensive front, they are in need of some more of that penetration. That's still the one weakness, the one lack that I see in the last few weeks that they're still not getting enough of is enough pressure. They're getting more. They're getting more pressure, but they're not getting sacks, and they need to be getting those sacks in order to really start to cause more disruption and to really start to force more 3 and outs and really get off the field more on third down, make your job easier on your defensive backs. But one thing I'll say about Flus that I like he's been doing lately is, the first several weeks of the year, you saw a lot of that insistence on zone coverage, which is what this defense is. They Tampa 2. It's the way they play, cover 2, cover 3. But, what they've been doing lately is playing to their player strengths, which you've got a bunch of DBs who are really good in press man, and they've been playing a lot more man coverage lately, and it's been successful. They're getting more pressure more quickly because those press openings aren't there as early as they would be in that zone coverage where you're playing 10 yards off the receiver, So to me, I like that direction. I like what they're doing there with that. And I like how it's starting to be more of an aggressive defense, and they are making more of their opportunities. They're getting off the field on third down more than they were earlier in the season. And it's still not there yet. We need to see more sacks, and I'm hoping we do. But I think Dexter is going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I hope that as this season continues on, we start getting more pressure, because like you said, that's just helping out the secondary. And maybe that's a lot of why maybe Jalen wasn't necessarily getting the turnovers. Because he's like you said, press man is a strength of his, and it's kind of hard to get interceptions and takeaways when the ball's not thrown your way. And it's an indictment on him, but at the same time, that's a great thing. Like that means he's doing his job and playing his position. But in this scheme, that's almost an indictment, because that's what they're looking for, is those takeaways and the turnovers. But I think they're starting to see a little bit the growth in this defense now, and it's starting to mesh, and you're starting to see the things that we were looking for. The really, like you said, the big thing that's missing is just it's not even just getting consistent pressure, it's getting home. And that's something that they've been struggling for a few years now, and hopefully they can start really working into that. But if you're done talking about defense, there's something I want to go into really quick.
Yeah, we probably should move on to something else, because I do eventually want to get into some of the other topics, especially, with the whole non-quarterback controversy we mentioned at the top of the hour here.
Yeah.
So, go ahead. Whatever you wanted to get into.
Let's walk into that, because I've been reading the chats, and I'm seeing a lot of we're starting to get into that quarterback controversy. And Alexis made me laugh just now, because I can't remember who the commenter was, but they said something of the effect of him getting traded. Here it is right here. Justin is trade bait. But here's the thing. What value are you going to get out of him if you trade him at the deadline right now? Right now. Third round, second at the most right now. For the trade deadline isn't really a very it's not where you're not going to see a whole lot of moves at the deadline. You're not going to see a lot of activity. You're not going to get a lot of value there. And Alexis made me laugh because she said there's zero value because they're not going to trade him, and it's 100%
exactly.
fact. He's not going to be traded.
And one more point to that too, real quick. Okay, it's like the deadline is coming up in less than a week, guys. Bagent has had one start. He's about to have his second start. Are we really going to tie our season to Bagent after 2 starts, move completely on from Fields and say, well, let's take our chances with another quarterback, and then we're going to have another 2-3 years before we're finally rolling again? Do you guys want to wait several more years before that, number one? And number two, do we really not believe in Fields that much? I mean, he's shown a lot. Is he inconsistent? Sure. Of course he is. Has he been inconsistent as far as like the intermediate passing game, the nuances of the passing game, getting through his progressions and his footwork and all those things? Sure. What have we not seen from Bagent, though, so far in the game and a half that he's played that we saw from Field on a consistent basis?
Deep throws down the field.
Accurate downfield passes. Okay. I don't think they threw the ball down the field one time with Bagent in this last game. Not one time.
I think his deepest ball in the air was 18 yards. That was his deepest throw.
Trade deadline is on Tuesday, Halloween. So yeah, he's going to have 2 starts under his belt by the time the trade deadline rolls around. Okay. It would be absolute malpractice to tie your season to Bagent and say, well, we'll just go into the draft, move on from Fields, get, like you said, at most a 2nd round pick, and then say, we're going to move on from this guy, see if, we can move to make something happen with a new draft pick, and then potentially watch Fields turn his career around and become a great player with another team. And I don't even want to say he's turned his career around because he's already had a lot of success. He just hasn't shown a lot of consistent, nuanced quarterback play, quote unquote, I guess you could say. But he does a lot of the things that Bagent, for instance, has not been able to do. Whereas I will also say Bagent has done some things where it's like, there are areas where Fields does struggle. He gets rid of the ball quickly. He has a quick release. He sees things process very quickly. He's not afraid to dump the ball off and just make it happen right away. Like, for instance, I really think he works really well for like those perimeter pass plays, those smoke screens and stuff, where he's able to get that ball out to the outside shoulder and he gets his release out so quick and so fast as soon as the ball is snapped to where he's, guys like Moore and other guys on the outside can get outside the numbers and get down the sideline and pick up 4, 5, 6 yard chunk plays. Where with Fields, that doesn't always happen. He might throw the ball to the inside shoulder and then the guy's catching back here like this. And then he's backtracking the ball and maybe running for 2 or 3 yards, maybe on that pickup. So those kinds of things they do make a difference. And it is somewhere where, Bagent has shown an area where he's pretty good at, and Fields has shown a little bit of struggle there. But again, I'm going to go back to the same thing I keep going to, where it's like the things that Fields has shown an ability to do are things that very, very, very few human beings can do. He is not a running back. He clearly can throw the football. He's shown an ability to throw the football, and he can go through progressions. He's shown the ability to do that too. Look no further than going back to the Washington game and the game before that. He had 2 games in a row with over 300 yards and 4 touchdown passes. That's growth. Did he kind of take a step back in the next game? Yeah. But that doesn't mean that he's not better or he's not growing. It just means that there's more work to do, in my personal opinion. The kid has shown a lot. He's shown a lot. Again, he's just inconsistent. But you can use that. You can work with that. And anybody who has watched him play and anybody who's coached him and has talked about him has said that, he's got that ability and he's got that desire and that drive to be great. And he wants to be the best. So I really think he needs to be given that chance.
So I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here.
And thank you, Orion, for that comment about hitting the like button.
Thank you.
He always has good comments on the other shows. I want to give a shout out to him for that.
Yes. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. First, what stands out to you up front immediately in the Denver game and the Washington game compared to the other games that he started this year, the other 5 starts, or excuse me, the other 4 starts? What have you seen in those 2 games versus the other games? Go ahead.
Is that a rhetorical question?
No, I'm asking you. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's obviously it's in the offensive line play. I mean, Tevin Jenkins has been there.
You didn't say a thing I was hoping you'd point out. It was game script. It was how the game was called. It was the play calling in general. The thing that we saw in the Washington game and the Denver game was they played more to Justin's strengths. And yes, at some point, he has to develop some of those other things that are not strengths right now. However, you can't throw them out there and say, okay, we're only going to run things that you're not good at until you develop into those things and you develop strengths out of those things. It doesn't work like that. There's nothing in life that you go do that you can go out there and only work on the thing that you're struggling with without any way of trying to improve by helping you by working on things that do work for you, things you are good at. It's just not something that's going to happen. You can't expect somebody to go out there and do something that they're not good at without giving them something to build their confidence, to have strengths to build their confidence. So that was what was mainly missing for me in those other games this year. And we saw in the games last year where they would play to his strengths a little bit, and look what happened. He would build that confidence. He started letting it rip. If you go back to the Steelers game his rookie year, when he started letting it rip, we were starting to see what this kid could really be. Watch the Ohio State film. Now, we're talking college to the NFL, two totally different things. But look at how he played, how he would just let it rip. Now, I tend to agree. I've seen people say he's not pulling the trigger. I do think he sees the field. I think he's going through his progressions. You can see it. You can see his eyes moving, but he doesn't pull the trigger. He doesn't throw with anticipation. We've seen that many, many, many times. NFL open and college open are two totally different things. You have to throw those guys open. You have to assume those guys are going to be ready for you to deliver the ball. These receivers and tight ends, they're going on their route. You don't have to wait until they've turned their head. Throw it. Throw it to where they're supposed to be. These guys will make a play for you. That's what they do. That is their job. And we're starting to see, we haven't really seen that much from him as of now. It's starting to get better. I will say that I've seen it improve, but it's not there yet. Now, before I go on with anything else, let's talk about the draft. And let's talk about what happens if we get the number 1 overall pick. Assuming that we get the number 1 overall pick, which unless Carolina loses out for the most part, and they're 3-14 or 2-15, they may not even have the number 1 pick. So let's just assume that we have the number 1 pick and that you want to draft Caleb Williams. How many other positions of need are you not fulfilling there now? So you take him when you already at least have a quarterback who is showing that he can do things. You're starting all the way over with a guy whose weaknesses in college are the same weaknesses we saw with Justin in college.
Well, that's debatable.
It is to a point, but there are a lot of things. There are a lot of similarities in their game and at least their college tape. So let's face reality now. Assume that they don't get the number 1 pick. The only way, and I don't see any, there's no scenario where I see them taking Caleb Williams if they don't have the number 1 pick, because now you have to trade assets to get that number 1 pick back and move back into the number 1 spot. I don't see Poles doing that. He's got 2 first-round picks. That's 2 premier players that he can get right there. We need help in the trenches on both sides of the ball. There are 2 very, very good left tackles who are bookend players, probably potential Pro Bowlers for several years to come, in Fashanu. And then you have players on the defensive side of the ball. There's some good pass rush here. There's a really great free technique for Illinois, and I know Aldo's very big on him. We've talked about this before. But there's so many needs on this roster still where they need elite players. And there's not a situation in my mind where you go and take Caleb Williams when you still have this many holes on the roster and expect everything to just flip script right there, as if Justin is the only problem on this roster. And as we've seen over the course of the season, there's a lot of coaching fault here. There's a lot of coaching fault, and it's not just Getsy. Eberflus has made some very questionable decisions in games as far as what to do with timeouts, what play to use at the end of a half, things like that. Just this last week, like I'm not really sure his clock management skills are very good. There's so many things to point to, and I feel like the first thing everybody does is immediately point the finger and say it's Justin Fields. And I think the coaching staff is starting to do that too. Like, we could possibly see, like, hey, Tyson ran my offense and we had success. Justin can't do that. And so when it comes down to the end of the season, it's time for hirings, firings, and moving on from players. Justin's going to be the scapegoat. And they're going to say, well, we made it work with the other guy. You know, don't fire me. It's not my fault. So I just think that it's very easy to just point the finger at one guy and say it's Fields. But I think if you look at the totality of it, Fields has actually been one of the best players on this roster over the last 2 years.
Well, let me just preface this, first of all, by saying, if you have the number one overall pick, if they do end up getting the number one overall pick, it is going to be awfully, awfully hard to pass on Caleb Williams. That being said, as Bears fans, in my opinion, our goal should not be to end up with the number one overall pick and get Caleb Williams, even if he may end up being that kind of player. Our goal should be for Justin Fields to reach his potential so that we can, as you mentioned, use those other spots, use those other high draft picks on the other premium positions of need that we desperately have, or other premium positions that we still need, like defensive line, defensive end in particular, edge rusher. You can make a case that we still could use some more interior pass rush. So maybe a guy like Newton could be good to get in there. And again, there's so many other needs still outside that. Maybe Braxton Jones isn't the answer. I hope he is. He may very well be. But again, there's two, like you said, two really, really good tackle prospects at the top of this draft, and Alton Fasanu, who could be available there. So, you know, in my opinion, our goal and our desire should be for Fields to reach his full potential. And there was a comment on the screen just now I want to go back to about someone mentioned that we'll see what happens when defenses start to come up and play that intermediate pass game on Bagent, how he's able to respond to that. And I'll rebuttal that one of two ways. Number one, we're going to see, I agree with you, we're going to see if he can get the ball down the field for one. That's going to be the number one thing, if he's able to actually do that. And number two, they're going to have to be able to run the football effectively if they do that. If they're going to start taking away the intermediate pass game, the Bears better be able to run the football effectively, or get the ball down the field, which, you know, may or may not be able to do with Bagent. I'm not sure yet because we haven't seen it. He threw the one duck ball interception in the first game, and last week he didn't throw a single pass down the field. Everything was pretty much dink and dunk, which all looked good. He played really, really well. It just, you know, we didn't see that kind of arm talent that, you know, the downfield arm talent anyways, that we really are going to want to see. You really need to have in this day and age in the game.
Yes, for sure. You have to. And I people make it's crazy, all the comparisons we're already hearing, but I'm already hearing Drew Brees comparisons with Tyson Bagent, and people talk about, well, size, and Brees didn't quite have the arm strength, the arm talent. From what I've seen from Bagent so far, Drew Brees had a stronger arm than Bagent does so far already. I don't, for one, that's not a fair comparison to the kid. You're talking about a Hall of Famer, one of the greatest to ever play the position.
But I'm going to interrupt you real quick because Ravi makes a good point there. Getsy wants someone to use his system, is what he said. That, you know what, he very well could. That may be what's going on there. Maybe he wants someone who's able to run his offense the way he wants it to run. And, you know, honestly, there's some parts of that offense that we've seen from Justin that he struggled with, you know, again, with the intermediate pass game, the nuances, the footwork, some of those different things have been a struggle for him. But again, I'm going to keep going back to this because, you know, this stuff doesn't grow on trees, guys. The things he is able to do on the football field with his legs, with his arm talent, getting the ball down the field, with his accuracy down the field, with his ability to scramble and evade the rush and throw on the run, those things are not common. And if you can mold this kid into being even half of, you know, that kind of prototype passer that is wanted, the Bears can be really, really, really good with him. Really good. He's shown to be the best player on the field even without that stuff. And then in the couple games against, admittedly poor defenses, when he threw for over 300 yards and 4 touchdowns, he's shown that he can do it with his arm too. It's just a matter of whether we can see it done consistently. And I really hope we can, but we got to give him that opportunity.
I'm seeing a lot of comments here on Getsy, and I don't disagree. I agree with what you're saying. Getsy probably does want somebody that can run his system, but maybe your system doesn't work. And here's the thing. Luke Getsy was hired, and I'm seeing a comment on here, why hire Getsy then? Getsy was hired because he ran that Shanahan offense, and that Shanahan offense was what gave Eberflus's defense the most trouble over the years. The problem with it is we're seeing a shell of a Shanahan offense. Getsy's offense is not the Shanahan offense. Getsy's offense is the Aaron Rodgers offense. He is trying to get Justin to play like Aaron Rodgers. They are not the same player. Take out the fact that Aaron Rodgers is a Hall of Famer and has a Hall of Fame career. Take that away. They're not the same player. Their strengths are not the same. And what drives me the most crazy about all of this, even if you want to run your scheme and you want to run your system, that's fine. You want him to improve on his weaknesses. I 100% agree. He does need to improve on those weaknesses. However, what is the strength of this offense? The number one strength is the running game. We have our offensive linemen, their strength, run blocking. Our running backs we have a very good room of running backs. And it doesn't matter who they seem to put in there. They seem to get chunk yards and run all over the field when you actually tote the rock and stick with it consistently. And I think a lot of times when we're struggling as an offense, probably every time we struggle as an offense, is because we don't get the running game going from the start. And what does that help with? The play action game, one of Justin Fields' strengths, throwing the ball down the field. That has always been a strength of his. And if we would run more play action, we would see a lot more of those deep shots connect, and we would be able to take more deep shots. And it all starts with establishing the running game. Get the running game going, run play action, you'll get your deep shots, and you can also mix in your intermediate game there. You have to keep defenses guessing. But this is what drives me insane.
I will say I agree with you on that front. On that one front is that, and really lately it's been better, but we do the offense does need to do a better job of establishing the run. They need to commit more to the run. It's just a matter of that when they start to get away from it, and you can see Fields on the field when his confidence starts to dwindle, and that's when you start to see a different quarterback. When you see a confident quarterback and Fields on the field, he plays extremely well, and he throws the ball well. He does everything well. So to me, part of it is really establishing a rhythm on offense that he's number one comfortable with, a game plan that he's comfortable with, and then you got to keep going with that rhythm on offense throughout the game to keep him comfortable. And part of that is establishing and committing to that run game, which they're pretty good at when they do. When they actually commit to it, they run the offense, or they run the ball pretty well. And they're able to, run the play action, get the ball down the field. And he's good at that. Fields is good at getting the ball down the field in those situations, So I really do feel like that's a big part of it, and getting him moving. He's even said, he's been on the record saying, I like running around and getting moving. It gets me acclimating, getting ready for the game, So I think he really likes to get running right off the bat early in the game, maybe have a little quarterback run or getting on the rollout like a bootleg or something, and, getting himself moving right off the bat to establish his body moving for the game to kind of get into rhythm, I guess. Maybe that's what he wants and he feels comfortable doing. And I feel like I said, if they get the run game going more, if they can commit more to his strengths, and I've actually had a conversation about this with you in the past, as far as, to me, it makes more sense to run an offense and have a game plan that caters to his strengths. And then you start to sprinkle in throughout the games, those concepts that he struggles with, the areas where you want him to get better at that are important part of your offense, the intermediate passing game and things like that, and if you do that, sprinkle that in more and more as he gets better at it throughout the season, and I think you're going to see a more confident passer in those areas, So to me, it just all depends on what happens here. I don't think there's any reason for him there's no reason that they would ever have to trade him. I don't think he's going anywhere. He hasn't had, he's had 33 starts, but he still, I mean, you got to remember the first year was under a totally different system with a different regime. So things are totally different from that standpoint, for one. And again, he's running a different offense now than he was then. And he's getting used to newer weapons again. And now he's hurt again. So it's like these different things all play a factor here. And I still believe in the kid. And I really think that, if he gets more and more time and they start to, have more of the offense catered towards him, they play more like they did offensively, like they did against Washington, like they did this past week, because I feel like, Fields could have beat Vegas too. He'd have played just as well, in my opinion. I don't feel like there was anything that, they were doing defensively that gave me any reason to believe that he would have struggled against them. So, that's going to develop his confidence too. I don't think it's time. My point is you can't just decide to move on now. It's still way too early to decide that. You can't trade him now. He's not going to have any kind of value. You keep starting him the rest of the year. And if by the end of the season, he doesn't show that improvement and you have a high draft pick, then you move on.
So I'm seeing a lot of comments here about how Fields has had enough time. I want to go back. When Getsy and Eberflus were hired and Ryan Poles was hired, that was a fresh beginning right there. Fields was a rookie from that point on. That was, to them, that was the year he assuming he was drafted and brought in there. That's 24 games ago. So if you're going on how he's had this much time, in all reality, since they've been hired, Justin's played just over 20 games. So he's actually only had 20 games of offense. So you can't necessarily say that he's had all the time in the world, because they're not looking at the past. They're wiping the Nagy era out of the record, like it didn't exist for Justin. So it's not that he's had all this time, because they're only basing it on the time that they've had with him together. And in that time, it's just been just over 20 starts for Justin. And if you look at where he started to where he is now, you can't say there hasn't been growth. You can't say that he has not improved. There are so many things in his game that have grown in that amount of time. Yes, there are still plenty of things that he needs to work on. But what quarterback in the NFL right now, outside of the top 2 or 3, are polished all the way around? Let me give you an example. Who is one of the best 3 quarterbacks in all of football of the last 3 years? Joe Burrow. And what is going on right now? It is not good in Cincinnati. He has not played well. He got his massive deal. You're telling me that he's a finished product, or he's not a finished product, and he doesn't have room for growth, but Fields can't? I don't understand. Now, Fields hasn't taken the Bears to a Super Bowl. Fields has not been a perennial playoff quarterback. I get all that. But if we're talking growth as a player and how he plays the position, you can't. Players are going to have highs and lows. That's part of the game. Quarterbacks can have bad games. And you can't put all of that on him when the game planning is not prepared for that.
Well, again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. If they do, in fact, end up with the number 1 overall pick, it is going to be awfully, awfully hard to pass up Caleb Williams. He's going to be a very, very good player. But that being said, I mean, like I said, you're not going to move on from Justin right now by the trade deadline. You're not just going to commit to Badging after 2 starts. It's not going to happen. So you give Fields the rest of the year. You see if he can continue to improve. Now, the problem is if he shows enough improvement by the end of the year, but not enough improvement by the end of the year, if that makes sense, where he's still kind of in this middle ground where, well, we have the number 1 overall pick, but Justin has made some strides, but we don't really know if he is the franchise guy. Well, to me, in that case, then you probably do try to trade him, because you still have the 1 year under his belt. And then the other team will have his 5th-year option still also. So then you probably do trade him in the offseason if it's to the point where you have the number 1 pick and you don't know if he's your guy or not. Then, unfortunately, yeah, if he walks out the door and you see him have success somewhere else, it sucks. But it's like, at that point, you can't just, hang on to him. Then you have to take the guy at the top of the draft. He's the best quarterback in the draft for a reason. There's a lot of people saying what they're saying about him for a reason. So, and yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying in the comments there too. Poles is not going to go down swinging with somebody else's quarterback. Now, that being said, if you guys tell me if he starts to continue to turn it around, and in that last game was kind of a blur, and he shows more of what he showed in the Washington game and the game before that, and I don't know why I keep forgetting who they played in the game before that, but
Denver.
Yeah, Denver. I'm sorry. If he continues to show the improvement that he showed in those games and the passing ability in those games, and he's shown that throughout the course of the season and growing, he throws for 3,500 to 4,000 yards. He throws for 30 touchdowns. Then we got an argument here, guys. We have a conversation here we got to have. I mean, and you'd be lying to yourselves if you said there's not one. Even if it's not Poles' guy, if he's doing those things, which again, that's a long shot to say at this point, but if he does do that, that's a conversation. And that's a good point that Alexis brings up there too.
Yeah.
If Justin and Badgett help get this team some wins, does the coaching staff stay? Well, I think it just depends on how many wins we're talking about here. I mean, if they're flirting with anywhere under 5 wins, I think it's going to be awfully hard to convince anybody that this coaching staff is the one that needs to stick around. But if they mess around and get somewhere between 8, 9 wins, something like that, I don't know. Now we're having a discussion there too. But if that happens, it's because Justin's turned it around. In my opinion, it's because he's turned around and he's really made it hard for anybody to say I'm not the guy.
So here's where the problem lies. Assuming that we don't see enough from Justin over the rest of the season, and we go into the draft, we have the number 1 pick. Who is to say that Caleb Williams is even going to be what everyone thinks he is? Everyone acts like he's the greatest thing that's come out since Andrew Luck, and he very well may be, but no one knows that. And that's what Justin is now. You know what he already is and what the potential for growth is. At the very least, you know where the floor is at, and the floor is a mid-level to great quarterback. Not elite, but mid-level to great. And the ceiling is elite. You don't know what you're going to get from Caleb Williams. And that's assuming that they don't look at Drake May and say, hey, I like this kid better. You just don't know.
So,
we don't know where
I'm
he's
going to
going.
interrupt you for a second because there was 2 comments that were just up on the screen that I honestly agree with both of them, and they're very, very different. Very, very different realms here. So the first one was Alexis mentioned that Poles took the job knowing that Fields was the quarterback, did not know he was going to have 2 first-round picks and were potentially top 5 picks this year coming up. And he probably does like Fields. And I agree with that. I think that probably is true. He probably took the job. He probably evaluated him very highly when he was in Kansas City, even though they weren't looking for a quarterback. He's still a scout, still doing his job. He probably had a high grade on him. Probably liked him a lot. Probably had his second highest quarterback in the draft that year, like most people did. So yeah, he probably did like him a lot. But going back to the next point that Jordan makes after that, if you can get that back on the screen, thank you. 2.5 years of injuries and inconsistencies can't be outweighed by half season of productivity. I do agree with you to an extent on that. The 2.5 injuries of inconsistencies are obviously going to weigh a big part of that. But I agree with Tim also going back what he said before, that number 1, that first year was not with this staff and this regime. I don't know that he's going to totally ignore that. I'm talking about Poles right now, I don't know he's going to totally ignore all of that. But I really don't think he's going to take that as a major part of his consideration of what to do with this kid in the future. Now, that being said, this 1.5 years of inconsistencies. Now, if the Bears were to say they turn it around here, right, and they start to win some games, and they don't, their pick isn't a top 5 pick, but Carolina's pick is, okay. Let's go 2 scenarios here. Let's say Carolina has the number 1 pick and the Bears end up with that pick, right? Well, Fields has played really well in that time frame. Okay, the Bears have played really well with him. The Bears have a top 10 pick because they've rattled off some wins, but they're not a top 5 pick anymore. And Fields looks good. What do you do with that pick? I mean, most people are going to say you go ahead and take the quarterback, okay, and you trade Fields. Some people are going to say you move down and you try to get a haul of picks because there's going to be a ton of value for teams that want to go get Williams.
Can I stop you for a second? Look at the haul last year to get Bryce Young.
Well, yes, and I'm not.
Look at the talk for Caleb. Look at the talk for Caleb Williams compared to Bryce Young. Caleb Williams to most people is they think he's the next Andrew Luck.
there's two things there, though. That being said, number one, if Caleb Williams is really as good as, everybody thinks he's going to be, there's a reason that you have that pick and that everybody wants to go get him. And another point there, is that at some point you can't just trade for all these premium picks. You got to start getting some premium guys with these picks. You know what I mean? So again, to me, it's like, let's say the other scenario now. Let's say the Bears aren't playing as well, obviously, and Fields isn't playing very well, and you're not so sure, and they end up with the number one pick. Obviously you're going to take Williams. Let's say they don't end up with the number one pick, though, because Carolina isn't as bad as everybody anticipates them to finish, and somebody else ends up worse, like Arizona or Denver or something like that now. So now the Bears don't even have the number one pick. What do they do now? Are you going after May? Are you moving down? Are you committing to Fields? I think it all just kind of depends on how this goes. So again, we're going to go back to my previous point. You have got to let the kid finish the year and see how he does, and see if there's massive improvement, see if there's not massive improvement, see if there's minimal improvement, or see if there's any kind of improvement, because you have to base this on what he's done at the end here. There just, to me, still has not been enough, because we're not at the end yet. We don't even know what they're going to have yet as far as picks. So to me, you got to let it ride out. Hang on to him, because if anything, his value right now is not going to be any higher than it is in the offseason, trade-wise.
There's two things I want to point out. Number one, why did the Bears pass on Jalen Carter? Character. What is something that we've already seen? Now, I'm not putting Caleb Williams in the same stratosphere as far as we're talking about character concerns, because there's no criminal activity to his name or anything like that. But what we're seeing from him and his dad's comments about how he's not going to play for somebody because of NIL money, he doesn't need to, and this and that. Does that sound like somebody who really loves the game of football and wants to play for whoever?
That, to me,
that may not be coming from him.
They're playing
yes.
That's them obviously trying to work something. They're trying to work some kind of angle. I don't think that says anything about the kid's character, or his love for football or anything like that, because from all accounts, from what I understand, he loves the game just fine. And he's there's a reason that people use the word generational with him. I don't like throwing that word around, because, to me, there's only a few that are like that. I mean, to me, the best quarterback that I've seen in college since like Andrew Luck was Joe Burrow. And I remember telling you, there was a game LSU was playing. Again, I can't remember who it was, but they were undefeated at the time, and they were like the top team. Everybody knew they were as good as they were, and they were probably going to win it all. And I remember just watching the kid play and saying to you, like, man, this kid's like an NFL style quarterback here. He's the way he's got this poise and the command and the way he's throwing the football. He's going to be a really good player. And sure enough, he ended up being number one pick. But, to me, a guy like Joe Burrow is generational. Now, granted, I have not watched Caleb Williams' entire career. Okay. And I am not a scout or any of these things. So I can't say that, he's not the, consistent number one pick, and he's not going to be a great player. But I did watch him play against Notre Dame, because I'm obviously a big Notre Dame fan. And pardon my French here, but Notre Dame kicked his ass in that game. He did not look good against Notre Dame at all. And I don't know if that's an indictment on him, or if he's just had one game. Everybody has a bad game. I understand that, but it's like, if that's something that can get into his head and he can play like that for stretches, that's a concern. I don't know if that's the case or not, because again, I have not watched this kid's whole career, and I'm not a scout or anything like that. And there's a reason he's the top prospect, and everybody's saying that about him. But, just from that game alone, I didn't see generational by any stretch. No. So that's just my opinion. And again, like I said, I'm not like a credentialed scout or anything. That's just from somebody who watches football. But, I didn't see that personally. I thought Joe Burrow was like the last guy I saw that was in that realm.
So, and I before I say anything else, I wasn't assuming that his character was bad. I'm just throwing out a hypothetical, like, say it is a character concern. We've seen that they passed on Carter. What makes anybody think that they would bring this kid in if there is a character concern? And I have seen him on the sidelines. I've seen some of the way that he talks to his teammates and the coaches. And, you know, some guys can get away with that because of their play and because they're, you know, they run the offense a lot of the time, especially in college. They have the ability to change the plays and whatnot. So it may not be a big deal. I just don't know. Like, I'm just not sold on moving on from Fields to draft this kid. There's just, there's something like you said, I don't see generational. I just don't. And I'm not saying he's not a good quarterback and that he may not have a great career, and he very well could. But like I said before, we know what Justin's floor is, and we know where the ceiling could be still. That, you know, he's still improving and he's still getting better. He's still young. This is only his third season. And if you want to get technical like this, like I said, this coaching staff and this management staff are going to look at it and say, well, it's really only his second year. Like, we don't look at that first year the same way. I'm sure they're not taking it completely out of the equation, but I do think that they're not focusing on it nearly like they are these last 2 years. And we are seeing improvement. And and maybe it's not just my heart. I like Justin, and I think that this is the guy that we should be worried about, what we should be focusing on and trying to improve around him, because what have we given him up until now for an offensive line? And let's be fair, even though these guys have played well over the last few weeks, he's not. We're not having a consistent combination.
Let me laugh.
Oh, I just read that. That's funny. They did. I see the resemblance, Torian. That's pretty funny. Yeah. I'm a big Willem Dafoe fan. Boondock Saints is one of my all-time favorite movies.
We're kind of running low on time here, so I'll just kind of start to wrap this up a little bit. But, you know, I agree with a couple of the previous commenters. You know, it does kind of seem like time is running out for Justin here in Chicago. I really hope that's not the case. I really love the kid. I really like him a lot. I think his potential is so high, and I do still think that it can be unlocked. It's just a matter of, I really feel like, unfortunately, is with Getsy, it's like a matter of, there are sometimes you watch him as play design, you're like, oh man, I really like that. That's a really nice play design there. And other times you're just like, why are we doing this right now? Why are we not playing to our guys' strengths? Why are we running this stuff over and over and over again? You know, there was a smash concept that he kept running that last game. I think he ran it like 3 or 4 times. And it's just like, you know, you keep going back to that and they're all over it by the 4th time, you know? So to me, part of it is because they're not doing the best to mold towards the kid's strengths, but also, you know, he's got to take some accountability too, obviously, because he's not there either. So, you know, there's a little bit of fault everywhere. I do love the kid. I still hope he gets it together. Again, he's got to the end of the year, in my opinion. He's not going to have any more trade value right now than he would have, you know, in the offseason. So let him finish the year out. Let's hope he's the guy. He can get it together and he can show that he's you know, the guy we need, so we can address the other needs with those high draft picks.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tim.
I want to point out one thing really quick. Alexis made a comment on here saying, look at the risk in moving on from Fields. What's the risk if it doesn't work out? And Jordan made a good point back and said, you know, how does that risk hurt Poles? But it does, because if Poles decides to walk away from Fields and picks Williams, and we are going through the exact same thing we're already going through now, Poles is going to be out the door, because now he got to pick his quarterback and he failed.
Before you go on, think about it from this perspective. It's like, okay, so Poles gets here the first couple of years, right? His first 2 years, he's got Fields. He's got him tied to him, right? And that was basically by choice. He you know, it would have been stupid to get rid of him, obviously, because he was on his rookie deal. But it's like, and he's, you know, you got to see what he's got. But again, he's got the kid right now. So let's say he decides to move on, you know, and in 2 years, you know, now we see that they've drafted Caleb Williams or whoever, and it's not working with this guy either. So it's like now, 4 years down the road, 5 years into Poles' tenure, yeah, it kind of does look back on him, because now he's decided that he didn't want to build enough around Justin, and they didn't want to work the offense enough around Justin to have success, to the point where now they lost enough games because of the personnel, because of the offense, whatever it may be, to where now Poles is going to lose his job because they didn't have success.
Yeah. I just don't think it's going to look bad on Poles if he does this. It's going to look bad on him in multiple ways. If he decides to stick it out with Justin and it doesn't work out, then it's like, well, you had a chance to take a quarterback and you didn't. But again, with the ceiling that he's got and the floor that he's got, at least you know what you have. If he goes on and takes Williams and Williams ends up not working out, or we're right back in the same place we are now it's going to look bad on him and he's going to get fired because he had the chance to pick his quarterback and this is what he chose. It's like you made your bed, now you got to lie in it. And, you know, a lot of it, people talk about coaching and like who's gets he calling the plays and everything like that. And yes, I agree. I think that has a lot to do with Fields' success and lack of success is the game plan that goes into the game certain weeks, like the game plan we saw against Denver and against Washington. It's totally different from the game plan that we saw against Minnesota. So, you know, and I've read a funny comment on here, what OC's out there because Bieniemy looks like crap. Well, Bieniemy is not an offensive coordinator. He wasn't an offensive coordinator in Kansas City. He may have had that title, but look at who held the play sheet every game and made every call of every play when Bieniemy was the OC out there. It was Andy Reid. It wasn't Bieniemy. And there's probably a reason why this guy got multiple interviews and was never hired for any job. You know, that's probably why he's not having a whole lot of success is because he didn't really get a lot of time to call plays because he didn't get a chance to do that in Kansas City.
Well, I don't want to get off into that, but I do want to make one more point, you know, before we kind of get out of here. And if there's any questions that anybody has too, I want to get to those. But the point I want to make is still, you know, it's still early. It's only, you know, week 8, right? You know, yeah, it's week 8. We've played 7 games. So, you know, let's say, you know, the Bears win some more games. Let's say Carolina wins some games. We don't even know that the Bears are going to end up with the top pick in the draft. We have no idea. And if they don't, you know, have the number 1 pick, then this Caleb Williams thing isn't even a discussion for the Bears anymore. It's like totally not a discussion. So, you know, which let's be honest right now. If you're Arizona, if you're Denver, if you're one of these other teams that, and Denver, you can make an argument whether or not they think they have their quarterback or not with Wilson. But, you know, if you're one of these teams, you know, and you have a chance to get the number 1 pick in Caleb Williams, and your team's not very good, at the end of the season, are you going to be trying to win too many games? I mean, really? So like I said, we don't know even if the Bears are going to have the number 1 pick. And if they don't, this isn't even a discussion. It's not even a discussion. So they still might be in a discussion for a quarterback, but it ain't going to be Caleb Williams. So like, that's where you really have to talk then is like whether another quarterback is worth it as opposed to another guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., like, you know, like a premier edge rusher or something like that, you know? So again, to me, and I agree with Alexis, Denver and Cardinals will probably be in tank mode. So
they already are.
You're talking about, you know, most likely not even getting the top pick in the draft if one of those two finishes number 1. So you're not getting it if one of those two does. So that's kind of where I want to leave it with that part. We're still way early in this process. But again, as Bears fans, in my opinion, we should be hoping, and our goal should be that Fields turns this thing around this season. He starts to show more and more progression like he did in the Washington game and like he did in the Denver game. And he can put together like a 2-minute drive at the end to win a football game. That's what I would love to see from him. That would really show a lot to me from him. So before we close it out here, are there any questions from any of the commenters that were up in the chat that we might have missed somewhere that we can answer before we get out of here? Here's one from James. Why doesn't JF1 get rid of the ball quicker? That's a good question, James. So I feel like there's a couple reasons for that. And to me, the number 1 thing is he's always looking to get the ball down the field. That's to me first and foremost. The second reason for that is because I feel like sometimes his vision and his footwork get out of whack with each other and they really need to be tied together. I feel like sometimes you can see his eyes moving and they're like on the open receiver. And it's like, why is he not throwing that there? Why is he not hitting that guy? And I think it's because he's already starting to move on towards his next progression before that starts to open up. And he never really has thrown with great anticipation. So that's a part of it too. It's like, is he ever going to be able to throw with that kind of anticipation? I think at this point in his career, it's pretty safe to say he's never going to be like a high-level anticipatory passer. But that doesn't mean that he can't be a high-level quarterback. And does that mean he can get the ball out faster? Yes. And another part of it too, James, I think is because his arm angle, his arm motion is still pretty elongated. And I think part of it's because he was a baseball player growing up, a shortstop, you know, had that long whipping out arm motion, but it allows him to make those sidearm throws and create those weird angles with this arm too, to make some throws that other guys can't make. So there's give and take to this stuff. But that's a great question.
I'll take this one. One more. I was reading this one. Do you guys think Foreman as running back one can work? I think there's a lot of running backs that could be running back one in this offense and would work. The offensive line is dominant in the run game. And there's one name I want to mention that if he's out there, I think there's most NFL running backs can be running back one in this offense, and that's Tevin Jenkins. The guy is a monster. When he is playing, it's a totally different offensive line, and he just moves the whole pile. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I think Deontay Foreman is on the level of Herbert or of Roschon Johnson. There's a reason that those guys are ahead of him on the depth chart. But as far as he's a great bruiser, this guy will plow through the line for you, and he gets hard, tough yards. I do really like how Deontay Foreman plays, but yes, I do think he could suffice as running back one, at least while Herbert, and if Johnson is back this week, I still think that Deontay could be the number one because of how good this offensive line is in the run game.
I want to jump into that question too a little bit because I want to make a comment on that also. I think it was very impressive what he did, last week. I think he played really well. Going back to that, though, I will say one thing. There's a reason that he's played on the amount of teams that he has in the past several years, and he's bounced around as much as he has. And it's not because he's not a good runner. And we can see that. We very clearly can see that. He had 900 yards last year in Carolina. He's clearly a good runner. But it's the other areas in the game that he kind of struggles with a little bit. He's not the best pass catcher. He's been exposed in pass blocking we've seen in a couple of games this year. So, I mean, and I don't think it's not because he's necessarily a willing guy, but he's not very good at it. He's a good runner. He's a solid runner. I think Herbert has shown major improvement in pass blocking. To me, when he is healthy, he's got the best vision of any back on this roster, and he should be the quote unquote number one guy to me. Herbert, anyways, especially with the improvements he's made in pass blocking. But Roschon, to me, is still very capable of being a short yardage guy, a very, very, very good pass blocker. He's probably the best pass blocker on the team. So he's going to get a lot of run on third down. And so Foreman, that's kind of like, to me, he's been the odd man out a couple of weeks now, is because these other guys do things well too that he does well, like running, pass blocking, which is something they do better at than he does, catching the ball out of the backfield. So I think he is capable of being the number one back. Yes, Ravi, I'll say that. He's capable of, and part of it's because, like Tim said, the offensive line is capable of being dominant. And I want to make a point here about Tevin Jenkins, like he said too, that I wrote down earlier. I wanted to share with you guys. In the Washington game, which was his first game back, by the way, they ran almost exclusively behind him in the running game. And that's a shout out to I'm Bearing Down on Twitter, by the way. You guys should follow him. He's a very good follow. Mm-hmm. But, when you're running the ball behind that guy exclusively in the run game, that says something, and he's obviously, he makes a big difference there. And if they can finally get all five of their guys together and healthy, I kind of agree with Tim. There's a lot of guys that could be a number one back in this system. And I think Herbert, when he's healthy and this offensive line is together, is going to show you guys that too some more, as he already has a little bit this year. Mm-hmm. Great question, though.
Yeah. So, Jeff, we've kind of gone over here, but I want to ask you one thing before we close here. What's your prediction for Sunday?
You guys are going to find this out about me. I hate making predictions because I'm always wrong. But I'll say this I without making an actual prediction, because like I said, I don't like doing that. This is what I will say. I think the Chargers are absolutely going to challenge the intermediate routes. They're not going to let Badge just pick them apart inside like that. They're going to press a lot, in my opinion. The Bears are going to have an opportunity to run the ball effectively, and I'm going to be very upset if they don't commit to it, because I think they can run the ball against this team. Khalil Mack is a good run defender, and I think they're going to have to run the ball away from him. But if they can establish the run in this game, I think it's going to help Badgett out a lot, because, again, I'm not convinced he can get the ball down the field. If he can, great. That's a great problem to have. But I do feel like they're going to need to get the ball into the playmakers' hands, and the defense is going to have to slow down the offense, because that offense is still pretty good, regardless of how bad, the Chargers have been this year.
I'm not going to give a final score prediction, because I think this game is going to go in a direction that I really don't want to say out loud, because it's going to pain me to say it. But
you have Justin Herbert on your fantasy team. That's the only reason you say that.
Hey, you know what?
In Fields, it's
Well, listen. Before I say anything about this game too, though, with Herbert, there may not be a quarterback in the NFL who has more arm talent than him. There is not a throw that he cannot make. He can make every throw that a quarterback needs to make, every one of them, and his arm talent is unreal. And for whatever reason, they just can't seem to put it all together. But about this game, my prediction is, yes, I think they're going to challenge that intermediate game. I do think that Staley is good enough of a defensive mind to know, I got to get away from my scheme a little bit and bring guys into the box more and shut off that short passing game. But I do think that we're still going to gash that defense a little bit, especially in the secondary. Derwin James can't cover everybody. I just think that DJ Moore is going to be a lot for them to handle, and I think Bajan's going to find him on some open running room plays. And I just think defensively, for whatever reason, Herbert's struggling with that broken finger, even though it's on his left hand. He's really struggling to grip the ball, and it's not working out for them very well right now. And I think the defense is going to challenge that a little bit. Not having Mike Williams means that they can probably focus in more on oh my gosh, the other guy, the other receiver there. So I just think it's going to really help them out defensively to be able to focus in on one guy a little more than they would have to normally. And I think we're going to get a sack in this game early. I just think that if we can do that, we can really start putting pressure on him and make him throw some inherent throws and maybe get some turnovers in this game too.
How about this? For the debut episode, I will make one prediction, and it's because it's a very mild prediction, and I don't think it'll come back to backfire me in any way. So my prediction will be Gervon Dexter finally gets his sack that he's been waiting for with those 9 pressures, whatever it is, last couple weeks now. He's going to finally get home and get himself a sack this week. There's my prediction.
I like that. That's a good one. I'm going to say my bold prediction is TJ Edwards forces a fumble.
Oh, that's a good one too.
I like that. I've seen a lot of the peanut punch out of him. I think he's going to get one.
Yeah, that's one thing I want to close it with too. Is I will say we've heard a lot of criticism about the big, highly paid linebacker play, and how Edmonds and Edwards have not done a ton. But I'll tell you what, the last couple of weeks they've turned it up, especially Edmonds. I love the way they're starting to play. They're all over the field. They're making plays on the ball finally. I love it. Love to see it, and it's important for this defense.
Hey, and you paid less than what you would have paid for one player. You got out of 2 really good linebackers.
Well, I think you could still make an argument that Roquan's been such a good player that they probably should have just paid him and hung on to him. But
yes,
it's a conversation for another day. So I don't know if we have any more questions before we get out of here. We'll see if we can address them. I think we're good. Well, let's just say at the end here, I appreciate everybody for showing up tonight. I feel like it's been a great debut episode. We've had some great questions that came in, some great opinions and comments. I feel like it was a spirited debate in here, and everybody made some good points. So again, I appreciate everybody joining in. We'll be back next Friday, same time, 6 Central, 4 Pacific. That's since I'm on the West Coast here. Tim's on in Indiana, so it'll be 7 o'clock Eastern time next week. We'll have a little bit longer of an intro probably next week, and I'll have a new computer that's being sent in, so maybe my graphics will be a little bit better too. So, yeah, we should have a guest next week also. So hopefully we'll get all that squared away, and we'll have a great show for you guys next week. Appreciate you stepping in.
Thanks, guys. Go Irish tomorrow.
Go Irish and go Bears. Bear down.